pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of black exploitation films. I've already talked about two Mario Van Peebles movies on the Black track, Posse and New Jack City. But not everybody knows that before Mario became a writer and director, his father was a bit of a trailblazer in the writing and directing field himself. I showed Melvin briefly when I talked about the movie Posse. He was Papa Joe. But today, I want to talk about a movie that he wrote and directed himself back in 1971. That movie is Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song. With a title like that, you already know that this won't be your normal movie, and that's putting it lightly. Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song is about a former orphan named Sweetback. After being chosen to be a pretend criminal so that it can look like the cops arrested somebody for a crime, he ends up beating those same cops half to death after they assault another black male on the way to the jail. Talk about priorities, y'all had one job. Y'all couldn't hold off assaulting a black male for about 15 minutes. Essentially, Sweetback is on the run for their entire movie. Sweetback is also like a porn star or something? Seriously, the movie begins with him as a young boy in a brothel. And if you need any evidence as to why this movie was rated X back in the day, then look no further than the fact that it begins with a sex scene between a minor and a grown woman. The minor is played by a young Mario Van Peebles himself, but that's burying the lead. Times have definitely changed and people were cool with this scene. Yeah, Mario was like 16 years old, but good lord. Anyway, the woman gives him the name Sweetback, and he takes that and the reputation with him all throughout his life. What does he do for a living, you ask? Why, he works in a sex theater, of course, or whatever you call this. When he gets in trouble and is in danger of being killed by a bunch of bikers, how does he get out of it?
Fucking.
You damn right. Well, actually, that just gets him a place to stay for the night. He's actually rescued by a young John Amos on a motorcycle, but decides to give the ride to a friend since it can only fit one extra person. But usually, sex is how he gets out of every situation. He even has sex with a woman to get his handcuffs removed. I feel like there was an easier way, but he wouldn't be Sweetback if he didn't at least try to have sex first. Also, get this, all of the sex scenes were legit, meaning they actually had sex on set. It's no wonder Melvin ended up with an STD at the end of filming. Don't tell me how dedicated you are to your job unless you're trying to match Melvin Van Peebles' energy. Anyway, since nobody wanted to finance, star in, or barely even show the movie, Melvin borrowed $50,000 from Bill Cosby of all people, shot the movie himself, and starred in it. He even did most of the music, and had the rest performed by a then unknown Earth, Wind & Fire. The cheapness of the movie shows with the shaky and blurry camera angles, the weird cuts, and the editing where it jumps to randomness, or sometimes to something that has absolutely nothing to do with what just happened. It all has a surreal nature to it, and in a weird way, kind of adds to the charm. Melvin said that the blurry and double exposed shots were supposed to represent the emotional state of Sweetback, and I guess if you keep that in mind going in, it kind of makes sense. But it's best not to think too hard on what's going on. The story isn't something that should be the focus. It's mostly just Sweetback running halfway across the country to avoid the cops. Damn, I sure should have taken that ride from James Evans. These dress shoes killing me. He barely even speaks, which is the reason that most of the actors who were chosen for the role turned it down. He may say 7 words at the most. My favorite parts of the movie is all the people Sweetback goes to for help. Nobody is willing to get involved. The porn theater manager literally takes a dump on the idea of helping Sweetback.
Yeah, baby.
He goes to a preacher who you would think would be willing to help, but not at the expense of his upstairs sex slaves business being discovered. Who are these people? With all this randomness, you would think that the movie wouldn't have been well received, but Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song received generally favorable reviews, especially among the black community, and made the equivalent of around $100 million today. The success of the movie essentially influenced and led to the creation of the black exploitation genre, because studios now realize that cheaply made movies highlighting certain aspects of black culture was financially viable. That alone put Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song in a category of its own among black films. There was a remake of sorts in 2004, but it was actually a biopic called Badass, starring Mario Van Peebles playing his father. The movie is about the making of Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song, and was very critically acclaimed, even though it didn't do as well financially. Check out Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song, but only if you go into it with an open mind and realize that it's not going to be a masterpiece. Just think of it as one of the godfathers of the blaxploitation era. Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black History Month, a 28-day celebration of black exploitation films. Yeah, who's the man that would risk his neck for his brother man? Whoever he is, he's one bad mother. Well, you already know. You've heard it a million times. I'm talking about Shaft. When I say Shaft, I know a lot of people think about the TV show, but before that, Shaft started as a 1971 movie. Shaft was directed by Gordon Parks, who was mostly known for his iconic photography and documentaries on the life of poor blacks during the 40s through the 70s. He's one of the most iconic photographers ever, and used his notoriety and success to produce and direct the first Shaft movie. Shaft stars Richard Roundtree as the titular character John Shaft. He's a private investigator, I think, but his actions seem to go far beyond what a usual private investigator does. He's not afraid to kick some ass when the situation calls for it. Legality be damned. His look is so smooth, so 70s. With that leather jacket and that trademark mustache, he just gives off don't mess with me energy. All credit for that goes to Parks, who insisted that the look be a certain way after the studio tried to get Roundtree to cut off his mustache. I can't even imagine him without it. The story goes like this. A local gangster named Bumpy Jonas, who's a not quite subtle enough nod to real-life gangster Bumpy Johnson, asked Shaft to help him find his kidnapped daughter. You would think a phone call would suffice, but Bumpy sends his goons over to abduct Shaft. I guess that was the plan? I don't know what the ultimate plan was, but it does not go how they thought it would. Look at that. He just let that dude fly right out of the window to his death. He doesn't even get so much as a slap on the wrist for it. Shaft does agree to take the job, for a substantial amount of money of course, and spends a large portion of the movie gathering clues and additional forces to track down and figure out just who took Bumpy's daughter. I have to give the movie credit for maintaining its focus. It doesn't deviate far from the main narrative at all, and when it does, it quickly gets back on track. It's kind of a slow burn, and there's not much action in it until the end, but it's Shaft's charisma and all-around badassery that carries it. Nobody messes with Shaft, not even Bumpy's men.
But listen, Snow White. Me and you gonna tangle sooner or later.
Why don't you stop playing with yourself, Willie? You ain't gonna do shit.
There's a little humor here and there, but it's mostly misses. Like this one joke that comes from a girl that Shaft takes home from the bar. He comes back home to find her still in his bed, which by the way, he's a better man than me. And he tells her to hit the bricks. She's none too happy about it, and her response is,
Hey, baby, please close the door, huh?
Close it yourself, shitty.
They keep trying to get this joke over for the rest of the movie, but it just doesn't work.
Close it yourself, shitty.
Looks like you're gonna have to close it yourself, shitty.
Yeah, just stick to the action, Shaft. Everything about it is just so stylish, and you could tell that Gordon Parks really had an eye for environments. He insisted that the movie be shot in New York, because otherwise it just wouldn't look right, and the mood would be totally off. He was right. The atmosphere of the different neighborhoods really comes through on the screen, and it's helped by a classic soundtrack by Isaac Hayes. The music is so good and iconic that Isaac Hayes won an Academy Award for it, becoming the first black man to do so for a movie score, and only the third black man period to win one. If you ever listen to the soundtrack, then chances are you've heard most of the songs numerous times over the years, either through hip-hop samples or commercials. Shaft's theme song is one of the most famous songs ever made, easily. It goes without saying that Shaft was a major success, grossing over $12 million on a $500,000 budget, and spawned 2 sequels in the 70s, as well as 2 additional sequels in 2000 and 2019. I think it's safe to say that that man Shaft is one bad mother. Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black History Month, a 28-day celebration of black exploitation films. Today's movie is Cool Breeze. The tagline for the movie says, "From the company that brought you Shaft." But believe me, these are 2 totally different movies. Cool Breeze is actually the 4th movie adaptation of a book called The Asphalt Jungle. The first movie came out in 1950 and is pretty critically acclaimed. Cool Breeze is a 1972 movie and is the first, and so far, only all-black version of the book. Cool Breeze stars, and I know I'm gonna jack this dude's name up, Thalamus Razulala as Sidney Lord Jones, a felon who gets an early release from prison and goes right back to what he knows. He goes straight to his bookie to come up with a plan to steal $3 million in diamonds. You might recognize Razulala as the police commissioner who yells at Detective Stone in New Jack City. Of course, Lord Jones can't do it all alone, so he enlists the help of a variety of different personalities. There's his bookie, who gets him in contact with Bill Mercer, the man who will put up the money to fund the heist. There's a reverend, who just so happens to moonlight as a safecracker. Then there's John Battle, a diner owner who's really only doing it to help out his habitual screw-up of a brother, Travis Battle, played by Jim Watkins. By the description of the movie and the heist angle, you would think that Cool Breeze was a serious crime drama, but funny enough, it's actually a comedy. At least I think it is.
You like titties? Huh? You a titty man. You want to see some titties?
Emma.
I don't know if it was intentional or not, but almost every scene in Cool Breeze is hilarious. Take this police lineup scene for instance. It really has no reason to exist, except to introduce a crooked cop who provides protection for black criminals. But it goes on as an extended comedy bit that goes on for at least 10 minutes. Like, look at this dude. Is he supposed to be dead or something?
Claims he's Jesus. Who? Jesus.
Oh, okay then, well that makes sense I guess. Even the heist itself, you would think it would be the most serious scene in the movie, but it also has comedy when the getaway driver gets a nosy cop so drunk that he doesn't investigate what's going on. Also, when a major character dies after pretending to fire an empty gun, the movie has a perfect opportunity to add some dramatic weight to the scene, but instead...
There's a note, Lieutenant. Please don't tell my wife about the empty gun. She'd laugh. Let me go, Grand.
If the comedy was bad, I might have a problem with it, but it's genuinely laugh out loud funny all throughout. At least to me, I was highly entertained. The movie wasn't received all that well by critics, with most saying that the plot doesn't really resolve anything, and that's true because the diamonds do end up being an afterthought. However, I've seen the 1950 version of Asphalt Jungle, and Cool Breeze is almost a scene-for-scene remake of that movie with very little difference. The characters are the same, and the plot is the same, with maybe 2 or 3 differences. The only real difference is that this version is essentially a comedy, where Asphalt Jungle wasn't. Cool Breeze also puts a little more emphasis on the women, since the 3 main characters all have one. It was said that they were shallow and one-dimensional, but I feel like they were different enough to complement the men they were attached to. Pam Grier even makes her first appearance on Black History Month as a hooker named Mona, who doesn't get her money up front apparently.
Was it nice for you? Maybe half a bill, huh?
Baby, I want you. I know what number to dial.
We'll get back to her later though. As far as the movie Cool Breeze goes, I really enjoyed it. Yeah, the heist and the diamonds are a bit of a MacGuffin, but the constant humor and the competent acting makes me forget about any issues with the plot. If you want a quick laugh and an entertaining watch, well, recommending this movie is as easy as a cool breeze. Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black History Month, a 28-day celebration of black exploitation films. I know I'm not alone when I say that the first thing that probably comes to mind when somebody says Superfly is the image of a pimp with a wide brim hat that most likely has a feather in it and a bright colorful suit with a fur coat on top. And you'd be forgiven for thinking that, because somehow the name Superfly has become synonymous with the pimp image in modern society. The song Freddy's Dead by Curtis Mayfield, which is featured in the movie Superfly, is even played in several movies and TV shows whenever a pimp appears on screen. The truth, however, is that 1972's Superfly is not about or has anything to do with pimping, so it's kind of a mystery how it got attached to it so heavily. If anything, the movie Superfly kinda makes you want to be a drug dealer. Superfly was directed by Gordon Parks Jr., and if that name sounds familiar, it's because he's the son of the man who directed Shaft. Jr. decided to follow in his father's footsteps and direct his own black exploitation film, and just like his father, he was successful in his efforts. Superfly stars Ron O'Neal as Youngblood Priest, a cocaine dealer who's decided he's had enough of the drug game. It's not often you get to see a movie where the drug dealer is looking for a way out. Usually he's looking to get more and more money and more power. So the story of a guy trying to change his life is enough to make Superfly a little unique. The acting in this movie isn't quite as good as his prior contemporaries, with most of the dialogue seeming like a bunch of guys just having a regular conversation with each other. It's like they told him, hey, this is what the scene is about. You guys just talk it out amongst yourselves on camera or something. Ron O'Neal does a decent enough job, far better than his friend Eddie played by Carl Lee. For whatever reason, he's just not believable. I'm not sure why that is. Probably because it doesn't really seem like he's acting. Some would say that gives the movie a little bit of authenticity. I'll let you decide. His best part is a monologue when he talks about them not having any other options in life.
What the fuck are you gonna do except hustle? Besides pimping. And you really ain't got the stomach for that.
See? Priest can't even stomach pimping. Of course, if it was that easy to get out of the drug game, more people would do it. And Priest learns the hard way that it's not as simple as just saying you want out. He'd probably be a lot more successful if he didn't use so much of it himself. Obviously, this movie came out before Scarface and the invention of the 10 crack commandments. Apparently, the NAACP took issue with this movie because of its casual depiction of cocaine selling and use. It's kinda hard to argue with them when there's what seems like a 5-minute commercial for how fun cocaine is within the movie. That's not an exaggeration. The cocaine slideshow is easily 5 minutes, maybe even more. At the same time though, the movie set out to be a realistic portrayal of 1970s Harlem, so I think these scenes add a little bit of that grittiness that it was going for. It also shows that cocaine was and is an everyman drug, not just for black people. Not to mention, it's kind of a commentary on how much of a hold drugs have on the community, not just for the users, but also the dealers. I mentioned the song Freddy's Dead earlier, but I can't end this video without mentioning the soundtrack as a whole. It's fantastic. Parks Jr. took a cue from his old man and not only gave Priest kind of a theme song, but the entire soundtrack is kind of a narration on the whole film. Curtis Mayfield's Superfly album is very comparable to Isaac Hayes' album for Shaft, and I dare say it's actually better. It didn't win any awards or anything, but it did stay on the charts for a long time, even before the movie was released, and actually ended up grossing more than the movie. As for the movie Superfly, it's a bit of a personal story about Priest, with not much action or anything going on. And it's basically a commentary on what options for success outside of drugs inner city blacks had in 1972. The name Superfly doesn't apply to any one person in the movie, but rather it's a way to describe a certain style or attitude, like the way Priest dresses, or the car he drives. Look at this ride. That's Superfly, baby. Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of black exploitation films. Alright, playtime's over now. We getting down to the nitty gritty. It's time to talk about T, and the T stands for trouble. But that's Mr. T to you. Nah, not that weak one from the 80s that needed a whole team to fight. My man T is a one-man ass-kicking machine. And don't begin to think you could just open your mouth and tell him what to do.
Chalky sent me to say he wants to see you on some business, Mr. T.
Go back and tell Chalky to kiss my black ass.
Trouble Man don't have to take no shit from you. Oh, you took a girl home last night? Oh, well, that's cute. Trouble Man took home 4 and had sex with 12. Just be content with the fact that he's better than you in every way.
But either way, you lose. So fuck off, Joe. Dig?
Trouble Man was directed by Ivan Dixon and stars Robert Hooks as T. He's done a ton of TV, but you might also recognize him as Jesse Lee's father, King David from the movie Posse. Or not. That movie always showed him in blurry flashbacks for some reason. But anyway, back to Trouble Man. What exactly is Trouble Man? Is he a private investigator like Shaft? I don't think so. Is he a cop? Nope. A pool shark? Well, kinda. But don't try to put no labels on Trouble Man. He's an all-purpose kind of neighborhood cat. A super Negro, if you will. 2 guys who run an underground dice game come to T for help because they keep getting robbed. One of the guys is played by Paul Winfield, who had an illustrious career in TV and film before he passed away. They want T to come to the game to pretend to play dice in hopes that it'll get robbed and T can hand out street justice to whoever dares commit crime on his side of town. Of course the game gets robbed and one of the robbers gets shot, but there's some trickery afoot. And T realizes that the dead robber is an underling who works for the biggest criminal in town, a guy called Big. No, not Mr. Big. There's only room for one Mr. in this movie. When this info gets back to Big that one of his guys was killed, word on the street is that Mr. T did it. So now Trouble Man has to work to clear his name. I like the idea of a guy like T, who's seemingly untouchable, being forced to be vulnerable since he's being cornered on 2 sides and has no idea who has it out for him. Unfortunately, the movie doesn't even give us enough time to try to at least guess what's going on, and kills all the suspense by showing the audience exactly what happened and what the plan was pretty much from the beginning. This ruins any type of mystery going forward and does a disservice to the plot, which honestly isn't all that bad. Just would have been better as an actual murder mystery. Anyway, clearly that's not what Ivan Dixon wanted this to be about. This is about Trouble Man, and how nobody is a match for him. You came to this movie to see a black 007, not for the story. Not even the police are a match for him, and come across like complete simpletons who can't dare match the superior intellect of Trouble Man. The only one who sees through all the BS is this one detective who never really liked the mythological aura of Mr. T in the first place. The one bright spot for the movie, as usual, was the soundtrack. This one was done completely by Marvin Gaye, and once again, it's excellent. As a side note, that's the one thing I wish would make a comeback. Theme albums by one artist. The last one I can remember was the one album Prince did for Batman. But I digress. If all you want to see is Trouble Man kick ass, and believe me, his shoes are planted firmly between plenty of cheeks in this movie. Or you just want to hear his funny trash talk.
This is T. Chucky's dead. Now I'm coming to get your honky ass.
Then you're in for a treat. No matter who you are, nobody messes with the Trouble Man. Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of black exploitation films. Up until now on Black's History Month, I've talked about movies dealing with several serious issues like drugs, the criminal underworld, and corruption. But none of those movies so far has dealt with an underlying message quite as deep as Trick Baby. Trick Baby was based on a book of the same name written by Iceberg Slim, a near mythological man whose real name was Robert Beck. Beck was a former pimp who wrote several books, some of which were about his own exploits. If the pimp image was influenced most by anybody, it would be Iceberg Slim. What's a trick baby, you ask? Well, by definition, it's a baby born to a prostitute whose father was a John, or Trick, or client, or whatever you want to call a customer. And what does that have to do with the movie Trick Baby? Well, Kill Martin plays the character White Folks. He was born to a black prostitute and a white trick, so technically, he's biracial, and also a trick baby, which he's reminded of constantly. And before you say anything, yeah, I know, it's clear the actor is a straight up white man, but I think that's kind of the joke. He was raised by a con man named Blue Howard, portrayed by Mel Stewart. Blue taught white folks everything he knows about the con man game, and because white folks can pass as a white guy, they have a system set up where Blue can easily con black people, and white folks can use his complexion to con white people. The movie has pretty powerful commentary on what it means to be a black man who can pass for white, and how it feels to not really fit in anywhere. I like that it's kind of left up in the air whether white folks' origin story is even true. Majority of the black people in the movie don't even believe white folks is really black, including Blue's own girlfriend.
I still don't believe he's a nigga. I ain't never heard of no white trick baby so square he try to pass for black.
Speaking of Blue's girlfriend, I stared at her for like 15 minutes thinking to myself, where do I know this girl from? Then it hit me. This is Vernee Watson, aka Will Smith's mother on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. This was only her second movie, and she was a cold piece in 1972. But back to Blue and white folks. They pull a con on a guy who ends up having a heart attack when he realizes he's out of $10,000. But unknown to our con men, this guy was tied to the mob, and they want revenge when they learn what it was that led to his death. On top of that, there's a cop who's working with the mob to identify Blue and white folks, but he also wants a cut to stay quiet. Then on top of all that, a known hustler who runs the town also wants a cut of their money for operating in his territory, because everybody in town knows they're con men for some reason. So basically, they need another bigger con to make more money than they're spending on hush money, and to potentially get out for good. I like Trick Baby, because unlike a lot of movies during this era, there's some real tension and suspense. Every time you think Blue and white folks are gonna get away with something, there's another setback. Like when they go to con this random guy with a briefcase on the street for money. Everything almost goes to plan. That is until the guy decides that he and Blue should just shoot white folks and take the money for themselves to screw the white man. They have to improvise at the last minute and decide it's better to just run.
God damn.
It's not a perfect movie. Like towards the end, it seems to lose focus, and our characters take an unnecessary detour from the main story that feels like padding. That's minor though, and I was genuinely surprised and caught off guard by the ending. I think the ending alone is worth a watch, but on top of that, you're getting a smartly told story about racism, class, loyalty, and identity. And that's no con. Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of black exploitation films. Based at least partially on the 1931 gangster film Little Caesar, 1973's Black Caesar, directed by Larry Cohen, is a different type of black crime film. Even though it's supposed to be based on Little Caesar, it takes way more inspiration from The Godfather, which came out a year prior. Black Caesar starts with young Tommy Gibbs doing work for mob-type characters until he's viciously assaulted by a police officer, seemingly because he's paranoid, but mostly because he just doesn't like black people. I mean, he puts a kid in the hospital, so if that isn't real hatred, then tell me what it is. This prompts Tommy to grow up and decide that he's tired of being pushed around by the Italians that run the town, and he's going to take over, and take over he does, in record time at that. The movie doesn't really give itself time to breathe, because things happen at breakneck speed. One musical montage later, and all of a sudden, Tommy has an entire army of black gang members with an arsenal, and the entire neighborhood in the palm of his hands. Look how they follow him around. Hey, are those afro wigs? Call me crazy, but for some reason I assumed everybody in the 70s grew their own afros, and having an afro wig would have been a sin. I'll be damned. Older Tommy is played by Fred Williamson, and he's not quite as badass or likable as Trouble Man. In fairness, this isn't that kind of movie. Black Caesar is a slow crime movie about ledgers and families and your usual mafia stuff. Just think The Godfather. Just much shorter, and with black people in the place of the Corleones. It's actually kind of funny how much it blatantly steals from The Godfather. From young Tommy getting his start from another mob boss just like Don Corleone, to a scene where he gets shot in broad daylight just like older Don Corleone in The Godfather. He walks by a theater that's showing The Godfather, and in Europe, the movie was even called The Godfather of Harlem, so what other evidence do you need? Speaking of the shooting scene, Fred Williamson claims that it was shot guerrilla style with one camera, and that they didn't tell anybody they were going to do it. In the middle of New York, a city notorious for strict filming permits. I hate to call BS on what Fred Williamson said, but it's clear that this was shot with several takes and at several angles, and that the people were in on it. Like he claims when he drops the box in the middle of the street, a random guy picks it up for him, but in the movie, Tommy clearly picks it up himself. Or when he says that the taxi driving on the sidewalk wasn't planned, and that they paid a real taxi guy to drive on the sidewalk while they filmed from outside the car, and to honk the horn so that nobody gets hurt. I mean, come on. There's no way that's true. And it's clear there's another camera in the taxi. I guess he wants to protect the mystique and movie magic of the film for whatever reason. Or maybe he's telling the truth and I'm full of it. You watch it and tell me if I'm tripping. Tall tales aside, everything about it just feels disjointed and thrown together. Like one scene, Tommy is talking with his mother, who we don't see again until she's praying in another scene. Then next thing you know, she's dead. Well damn, what happened? Black Caesar doesn't even bother to tell you. She's just dead. Deal with it. Then, as if the movie needed anything else against it, Tommy is a completely unlikable character. How unlikable, you ask? Well, he outright rapes a woman in a problematic as hell scene that comes out of nowhere. It's impossible to feel sorry for your protagonist after something like that. I can't even say that the soundtrack is the saving grace this time. It's done completely by James Brown, and it's okay. The theme song, The Boss, is the best song, and you'll definitely recognize it when you hear it. The rest of the album is nowhere near as good as previous efforts by other artists. I think Black Caesar just suffers from an identity crisis, on multiple fronts, and probably would have been better off as his own unique story from the perspective of a man born and raised in Harlem. Sometimes it's just best to walk your own path and be your own boss. Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of black exploitation films. I know y'all was waiting on me to get to this pimping. Well, here it is. 1973's The Max stars Max Julian as John Goldie Mickens, a small-time criminal who goes to prison for 5 years after a botched job. Upon his release from prison, he gets some free game from a guy he used to work for, who tells him that pimping would be a more lucrative endeavor than what he was doing before he went in. It's nice that we at least get some dialogue of somebody important to Goldie explaining the ins and outs of the game, because other than that, it seems like Goldie just woke up one morning and was just magically already pimping. Once again, one musical montage later, and he's all of a sudden the biggest pimp in town, complete with a whole harem of harlots. A lot of dialogue and scenes from this movie has been parodied a lot. The Players Convention, for instance, has been parodied by everything from Jay-Z music videos, to The Chappelle Show, to Martin. And the way Goldie talks is pretty much the benchmark for how pimps sound whenever you hear them in a movie or a TV show.
Everything's gonna be alright. I'm gonna be everything to you. I'm gonna be your father, I'm gonna be your friend, I'm gonna be your lover.
The type of clothes he wears, his cane, the car he drives, Goldie in the movie The Mac as a whole did more to popularize the modern image of the pimp than any other presentation at the time, at least in my opinion. It's just a shame that the movie itself isn't quite as good as other blaxploitation movies at the time. The Mac is decent. Like I mentioned earlier, things just seem to happen with no rhyme or reason. It feels like it should have been put together a little more coherently, but funny enough, the pimping ended up getting in the way. Like in one scene, Goldie is talking with his brother who's a Pan-African revolutionary, and his brother is basically telling him that even though he loves him and glad he's making money, he's going to have to come for his livelihood at some point because he thinks it's bad for the community. There should have been way more emphasis on this relationship because that's quite the contrast in personalities and motivations. But in the very next scene, instead of following up on that, there's a lengthy, although admittedly kind of funny, scene in a planetarium where Goldie is hypnotizing his girls with the stars.
I will confide in disrespect Goldie. I will remain a lady at all times.
Forget 8-Ball and MJG, Goldie been space age pimping. Then right after that, there's another long scene that has nothing to do with nothing, showing Goldie and the rest of his squad playing baseball and having a cookout. I guess it's supposed to show that although Goldie is a pimp, he also does community outreach. I get that, but it's so long. And that time could have been spent on other things, like having more dialogue for Richard Pryor. Only the Mac can have one of the greatest comedians ever in it, and he not be funny at all. What happened? There's at least some conflict in the form of two crooked cops, the same ones who sent Goldie away 5 years ago, who want nothing but to see Goldie put under the jail. Then there's his old drug boss, who wants him to come back and work for him. He just won't drop it, and he low-key had me annoyed by the end. Perhaps his most famous foe is a rival pimp named Pretty Tony. Pretty Tony is like the Boba Fett of the Mac universe, because he's barely in the movie until the end, and has very little dialogue, but yet has this long legacy. Everybody knows who Pretty Tony is, or has at least heard of him, even if you haven't ever even seen the Mac. Admittedly, even with the limited screen time, he is pretty entertaining, no pun intended. The soundtrack is good, although not a classic, with standouts being the Mac theme song and I Choose You, which was sampled by UGK for the International Players Anthem. It was performed by Willie Hutch, and every time I hear that name, I can't help but think about the Last Dragon soundtrack, since he did the main theme. Willie Hutch, making multi-generational classics. At nearly 2 hours, it's a little overly long, but I recommend the Mac, mostly just to look back at one of the main influences on pimp culture, especially since Max Julian and Carol Speed, who played Lulu in the movie, just recently passed away in January, only 13 days apart. May they rest in peace. Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of black exploitation films. If I'm being honest, I actually was going to talk about a different movie here. Originally, I watched Ganja and Hess, a movie about a guy who becomes a blood-craving monster after being stabbed with a germ-infested knife, and I was going to do a review on that. But I watched that movie like 3 times, and I still, for the life of me, can't tell you what that movie was about. Trust me, I tried. So I'll come back to that one. Instead, I decided to pivot to another more well-known vampire movie. That movie was Blackula. Blackula stars William Marshall as the titular character, and if you're around my age, then you'll remember him as the second king of cartoons on Pee-wee's Playhouse. Before he becomes Blackula, the character's name is Mama Walde, which is a mouthful and challenging as hell to say. And unfortunately, it's what he goes by for the majority of the movie. Nobody thought, hey, maybe we should shorten that? Mama Walde travels from Africa to Transylvania to seek out the help of Count Dracula to help him stop the slave trade. Yep, the king of the vampires himself makes an appearance in this movie. Although not looking like the classical version of him, this dude looks more like a slave owner himself, fresh off the damn Mayflower. So I guess it shouldn't be a shock that he insults Mama Walde and threatens to enslave his wife.
Let us not forget, sir. It is you who comes from the jungle.
Damn, Dracula more than a little bit racist, huh? Mama Walde will have none of that though, and puts up a good fight until he's jumped by Dracula's minions. For daring to resist captivity, Dracula turns him into a vampire and locks him in a coffin for all of eternity. I know I'm not the only one who always thought the name Blackula was just a little too similar to Dracula, and that they should have came up with something a little more original. But if you watch the movie, you learn that Dracula named him after himself, so now it makes more sense.
I curse you with my name. You shall be Blackula.
So I guess technically, Blackula is his slave name. Blackula is trapped in that coffin until the 1970s, when he's awakened by two interior decorators, and is off to the races to do, well, basically nothing. That might be the biggest flaw of this movie. There's really no motivation for Mama Walde once he wakes up. Yeah, he's pissed off that he was trapped for all those centuries, and thirsty as hell, but he has no real goal other than to be a relentless killing machine. It's not until he meets a woman who looks exactly like his wife, of course because she's played by the same woman, Vanetta McGee, that Blackula gets a purpose, but it's never really spelled out. He wants this woman to be with him for eternity, but he doesn't want to turn her into a vampire. Well, how does that work? Well, Blackula doesn't want to drown you in the details, so just go with it. How easily she falls for Blackula hurts the movie in my eyes. I hate to bring out realism in a blaxploitation horror movie, but come on, give me a little effort. It's not all bad. Mama Walde has all the trademarks and motifs of the classic vampires. He's dressed impeccably, so much so that a guy keeps trying to buy his cape.
Say, Mama Walde, let me buy that old cape from you, brother.
His dialogue has a powerful delivery, and it's due to William Marshall's booming deep voice.
Oh no, you mustn't be frightened. Let me try and help you understand.
And in vampire form, he has a legit scary presence, and has a few moments of what could be considered jump scares by 1970 standards. Thalmus Razulala from Cool Breeze makes an appearance as a doctor and a pathologist who knows something is up with all the recent murders. He's a stand-in for the usual Van Helsing type character. He couldn't be the real Van Helsing though, because apparently he already exists in this universe. I was also pleasantly surprised to see Katie Lester, who played Aunt Lucy on House Party 3, make an appearance as a taxi driver.
Imbecile? Who the hell you calling an imbecile? You the nut that ran in front of my cab. You the only imbecile on this street. Boy.
I love that woman for some reason. As your basic early entry into blaxploitation horror, Blackula is decent enough. It's hard to make a unique vampire movie when everything about them has already been done to death. I give it props for being the first to change things up as far as the color of the character goes, and introducing him into a new environment, influencing future black vampire movies that take place in inner city neighborhoods. Blackula itself got a sequel in 1973 that was slightly better than the first movie. Despite the flaws of the first Blackula movie, even though vampires suck, 1972's Blackula definitely doesn't. Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of black exploitation films. How do you like your coffee? I like mine black, no sugar, no cream, and with a little bit of kick to it. The movie Coffee stars Pam Grier, and although this wasn't her first movie, obviously because I showed her when I talked about Cool Breeze, this was her first lead acting role in the movie that made her a household name. I know a lot of people probably assumed that it was Foxy Brown that made her famous, and although it has the same director, Coffee came first. Up until this point, most of the blaxploitation films starred mostly men in leading roles, with women being relegated to prostitutes or halfway mute props that the male actors addressed every now and then. You know, when they need sex or something, or maybe something to eat. Writer and director Jack Hill decided that it was probably time to change the formula up, and created a no-nonsense, street-smart female action star who wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty and didn't need any man's help to take care of business. The character's full name is Flower Child Coffin. Doesn't that just roll off the tongue? No wonder they shortened it to Coffee. Coffee is a nurse by trade, but when she's not doing that, she's on a revenge mission because her sister became addicted to heroin and she's determined to single-handedly get the drugs and crime off the streets. They showed the sister briefly, and I wish they said how old she was because she looks like she's around 10 years old. As a matter of fact, all the kids in this place look that age. I know it's supposed to be a juvenile center, but how are these kids getting access to heroin? Also, she just lays there and says nothing. She's addicted to heroin, not comatose. The movie set out to establish Coffee as confident in everything she does, and it succeeds in doing that. The way she handles guns and uses makeshift weapons to fight, they make sure to not make her come across like she's too, quote, girly to do all the same stuff that men do in movies. In contrast to that, the men in the movie are mostly made out to be pretty incompetent and too driven by their need for sex to be effective in doing anything. Nothing really wrong with that because it's only fair that the men be treated as silly as the women were in other movies around this time. One egregiously incompetent character in the movie is a guy called King George. He has to rank up there as one of the worst pimps of all time. He does have a cool ass theme song though. George. And just in case you couldn't figure out what he does for a living, he's a pimp. He's a pusher. Yeah. Aside from that, he has zero control over his women. They basically run the whole operation, and compared to other black exploitation pimps, he's way too nice to them.
What the hell's going on around here? It's like a goddamn pajama party.
The masculinity definitely took a back seat in this movie. The movie is a little rough around the edges because it rushed out quickly in 19 days to beat another movie to the theaters. And it's amazing it came out the way it did, to be honest. There's times when Pam Grier is supposed to be doing an accent, but then suddenly loses it in another scene.
So I'll come straight to the point as I like to do.
Just an accident. Accidents will happen.
Black exploitation veteran Sid Haig is also in it using a terrible fake accent.
Look at this. This is no Saturday night special. This is professional equipment.
Pam Grier did an interview once where she talked about the fact that it wasn't supposed to be a lot of bare breast in the movie, but she had a wardrobe malfunction one day during filming and her nipples began to show. Instead of stopping, she just kept going with the shot, and since then, it's become part of her identity. And boy, did the director really just go with it. Titties in this movie just seem to pop out for no reason at all, especially during the big hooker fight.
This will kill you.
Watch her go!
Speaking of the hooker fight, it involves my favorite unintentional funny moment of the movie. Look at this scene when the hooker attempts to attack Coffee. It's clearly a stuntman in drag, but you can't even be mad at it. For me, it's just one of those things that makes blaxploitation films great. The way they desperately try to work around small budgets. Coffee isn't Pam Grier's best movie, but it's highly entertaining throughout. She's the perfect mix of power and vulnerability. She uses her sex appeal to get what she wants, but that's balanced out with clever intellect and street savvy. Check it out, you won't be disappointed. Just sit back, relax, and have a nice cup of coffee. Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of black exploitation films. It's time to talk about Jones. No, not that Jones, the other Jones. Remember when I mentioned that Coffee sped up production so that they could beat another movie to the theaters? Well, I'll give you one guess what movie that was. Honestly, they could have taken their time because the two characters of Coffee and Cleopatra Jones couldn't be any more different than each other. The studio that made Coffee caught wind that Warner Brothers was producing a female Shaft-type movie and lost their minds with panic. In reality, Cleopatra Jones is far from Shaft, or Coffee, or even Trouble Man for that matter. Tamara Dobson stars as Cleopatra Jones, an international woman of mystery who shares more in common with James Bond than Shaft. Cleopatra Jones was written by none other than Max Julian of the Mac fame, and he successfully sold the idea of a female special agent with nearly unlimited resources to Warner Brothers. Where Pam Grier used sex appeal to get close to her enemies in Coffee, Cleopatra Jones doesn't need any of that. Tamara Dobson is dressed head to toe in slick fashion, which she had designed personally for the movie. Plus, she's a legit 6'2", without the heels. So naturally, she intimidates almost everyone in the movie. She even has a specially designed car so that she could fit her tall frame in it. Cleopatra Jones was initially envisioned as a serious anti-drug movie before it became an action film. But the anti-drug message still remains. Cleopatra Jones starts the movie in Turkey, overseeing the destruction of poppy fields in front of some very important looking people. So they establish right out of the gate that she has clout. This pisses off the main villain of the movie named Mommy, played by Shelley Winters. I read online that her portrayal was hated by most critics at the time, but I have to disagree. I love it. She's like an over-the-top comic book villain. The movie itself is low-key kind of silly anyway, and has a comical tone, so she fits right in. I only wish her and Cleopatra could have interacted a little bit more throughout the movie. Mommy retaliates by sending crooked cops to raid a rehab center that's run by Cleo and her boyfriend Ruben, played by Bernie Casey. This is all Cleopatra needs to head back home because you see, she's for the people, and she'll be damned if they get shaken down by lowly cops. She gets right to work as soon as she gets off the plane too. Look how she sneaks up on these guys. Like I said, it's silly, but it's the fun kind of silly. The only real flaw of the movie in my eyes is the fact that Cleopatra is just a little overpowered. Nobody ever gets the better of her, and she seems to have the right tool for every situation. She's got guns in her car door, she knows karate, she can ride a motorbike, she's even the world's best driver apparently. I can't be too mad at that last one, because it leads to one of the best car chase scenes I've seen in a long time. It's probably the highlight of the movie. Antonio Fargas makes an appearance as a pimp, probably the only negative stereotype in the entire movie, and it's not the first time I showed him as he was briefly in Shaft. He has a lot more dialogue here, and he'll go on to make a much larger impact than future blaxploitation movies. Esther Rolle even makes an appearance as a restaurant owner who runs illegal gambling in the back. Good times. Cleopatra Jones is basically a counterfilm to all the drugs and half-naked women that dominated the black exploitation movies of the 70s. Its anti-drug message and lighter tone is in direct contrast to the films it's compared to. There's no nudity, no drug use, and very little blood. It may come as a shock, but if I had to choose between Coffee and Cleopatra Jones, I'm taking Cleopatra Jones. I love Pam Grier and all, but there's just something cool about Tamara Dobson's presence as Cleopatra Jones.
Man, that is some kind of woman.
Right on, babe!
Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of black exploitation films. Today's movie is Gordon's War. It's another anti-drug movie, but it's a little more grounded than the previous two movies. Gordon isn't a neighborhood superhero or a spy or special agent or anything like that. He's just a normal dude. Well, a normal dude who happens to be a highly decorated military veteran. Gordon's War was directed by Ossie Davis, a very prolific actor with a long and stellar career in acting and directing. You may remember me briefly mentioning him in the Black Track for School days. He was the football coach. This was his third movie directing, following Black Girl and Cotton Comes to Harlem. Paul Winfield is back again as Gordon Hudson, a veteran who returns home from the Vietnam War only to find out that his neighborhood has been ruined by drugs and all-around criminal activity. Ain't that something? You go overseas and fight to not get your ass shot off, and you come home to this BS. Somehow, even his wife gets addicted to drugs. With that, Gordon decides that the war isn't over, and the fight is right here at home. It's admirable that at first, he tries to do it alone, Beretta style.
What you want? Your black ass.
Boy, cut that out. My man Flash Gordon too fast for that. However, he quickly realizes that he's greatly outnumbered and will need help from some of his NAM buddies. I like the fact that nobody even really questions his motivations or even takes a minute to think about it. They immediately join Gordon's cause. There's Smart Brother, you son of a bitch, I'm in. Roller Skating Brother, you son of a bitch, I'm in. And Fancy Suit Wearing Brother, you son of a bitch, I'm in. Smart Brother is played by Carl Lee from Superfly, and even though he did this movie immediately after Superfly, somehow he turns in a far better performance in this movie. It's almost a completely different guy. Either he's a far better actor than I perceived him to be, or he started taking his craft way more seriously. Regardless, the best parts of Gordon's War is watching these four brothers come up with all kinds of schemes and contraptions to take out the drug dealers systematically one by one. It really is interesting to watch because it's rare in these movies that the action is carried out with any real planning or thought. It's usually kick a door down here, fly through a window there, and start shooting at whatever moves. Women, children, animals, it don't matter. Gordon's guys do reconnaissance, plan infiltration routes, use infrared scopes, plant C4, all kinds of stuff. It really is played out like an extended military operation, casualties of war and all. It was all just really cool to me because it's so different than other movies of this era. Of course, all the pimps and drug dealers are caught completely off guard by all of this. I mean, how can you prepare for a bunch of GI bros? It's impossible. Also, be on the lookout for Luther the Pimp. He's played by Carl Gordon, who was Rock's dad on the TV show Rock. This was his first movie, so that's kinda cool. Gordon's War gets props for its creativity. It's not a bunch of dudes who are impossible to hurt or kill, mowing dudes down with unlimited bullets. It's regular brothers using the training they've acquired over the years to take back their neighborhood systematically. If you want a more grounded movie with realistic action, then it's an easy recommendation. Pimps, Power, and Pretty Ladies. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of Black exploitation films. I've joked earlier about people like Trouble Man and Cleopatra Jones being secret or special agents, but 1973's The Spook Who Sat by the Door sets out to be an actual portrayal of what it takes to have such a job. The Spook Who Sat by the Door was directed by Ivan Dixon, the same man who directed Trouble Man, but watching it, you would never be able to tell it's the same director. These two movies are on completely different sides of the spectrum, and it's probably because The Spook Who Sat by the Door is adapted from a book of the same name. The Spook Who Sat by the Door stars Lawrence Cook as Dan Freeman, and I'm almost certain that last name was intentional. He and other black males apply to be accepted into the CIA, since the governmental agency has been pressured to do better with diversity and integration. There can only be one chosen, and it becomes apparent early on that the white agents really don't even want one, and are hesitant to show them secrets and train them to be agents. Their suspicions aren't completely unfounded, even though they were completely driven by racism. Because when Dan Freeman is the sole guy picked, we learn that he is secretly part of a black nationalist organization. I like the fact that the movie doesn't outright tell you this up front, but rather just shows Dan excelling at everything they throw at him. He knows he has to walk a thin line between incompetence and extraordinary so as not to raise suspicion and be put out the program. When he's chosen, he's placed in an office right at the front of the building so that he's the first person anybody sees when they come in the door. That's the meaning of the title. Sitting the spook by the door was a real-life terminology used by organizations who wanted to show that they were being diverse by putting African Americans right by the front door. It also has a double meaning, as one of the slang terms for a spy is a spook. Don't come into The Spook Who Sat by the Door looking for comedy or action. This is pure drama, but it kept me invested the entire time. Things start to really pick up when Dan Freeman decides to quit the CIA and move back home to teach everything he knows to young street kids he calls the Cobras. It's a story about people who can see no other way out of their situation but to fight fire with fire. As Dan Freeman says, it's not even about hating white people.
Hate white folks. This is not about hate white folks. It's about loving freedom enough to die or kill for it if necessary.
It's about fighting for your rights within your own land, as any other marginalized group would do. You might think that the movie just barely qualifies as blaxploitation, and you'd have kind of a point. It's a tightly told story that takes on serious real-life issues, but I would say that it also has some hallmarks of a black exploitation film, such as the fact that it heavily appeals to a black audience with its subject matter. It's also shot in a style reminiscent of other blaxploitation films from the era. The only thing that really sets it apart is the fact that there's very little music. The movie makes up for it though with its top-notch acting. There are some things that aren't followed up on, like the director of the CIA somehow not realizing that the only black guy he chose is the leader of a gang of guys using all their training, or the fact that a prostitute that Freeman taught to love and have pride in herself is revealed to be a spy at the last minute, long past time for it to have an effect on the audience. But those are minor plot points that don't really change the overall story. It's really all about the young army that Dan Freeman creates and him trying to avoid being outed as their leader. The Spook Who Sat by the Door is the best film I've talked about so far, so it goes without saying that you should definitely check it out. Pimps, Power, and Pretty Ladies. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of black exploitation films. If you're like me and didn't really care for Black Caesar, then boy does director Larry Cohen have something for you. Released in the same exact year, Hell Up in Harlem is the sequel to Black Caesar, but it almost completely reinvents everything about Black Caesar. Yeah, it has some of the same characters, but that's about where the similarities end. Gone is the slow mafia-style melodrama of Black Caesar. In its place, we get a much more fast-paced and straightforward revenge tale that tells a more compelling story and even does a better job of making Tommy Gibbs a more likable person. All that does is beg the question, Why didn't they just make this movie in the first place? Well, I don't know the answer to that, so I'll just assume that Black Caesar was the movie that Larry Cohen always wanted to make. But when it was released, people were like, what the hell is this? So he made Hell Up in Harlem to correct that mistake. This, of course, is all speculation by me. I don't know. I wasn't alive during that time. Hell Up in Harlem picks up right after Tommy Gibbs is shot in the street in Black Caesar, but it retcons the ending. In Black Caesar, it's highly suggested that Tommy Gibbs dies in the end at the hands of some street children. They probably realized that's a silly as hell way to go for a big time crime boss, so it was rewritten to show that Tommy called his estranged father to come and save him before that even happens. He gets patched up in the hospital and goes right back to doing what he was always doing, just bigger. He puts his father in charge of half the company and begins to take over Harlem again. This gets the attention of a district attorney named D'Angelo, who's of course crooked, because what government or law enforcement person isn't in these movies? And it becomes a cat and mouse game of who can one up who. Not all of the sins of Black Caesar are erased. Tommy's wife Helen, played by Gloria Hendry, you know, the one he raped in the first movie, she returns in this movie, and I guess they felt like they didn't treat her bad enough in the first movie.
I got something planned for Helen. She was working with those pigs like D'Angelo to steal the ledgers. So she's got to pay for that, Paul, you understand?
Yeah, but dawg, that was after you raped her though. What was she supposed to do? They take her kids from her and all types of other stuff for no reason. But then, partway through the movie, Tommy grows a conscience and starts to feel bad about how she's being treated. Man, make up your damn mind. Do you hate her or not? In this movie, they try to redeem him by having him marry an over-the-top religious girl named Jennifer, who's played by Margaret Avery, who would go on to play Suge Avery in the movie The Color Purple. He treats her far better, so this movie tries to make it some kind of redemption story. Tommy's father, who I didn't mention much in Black Caesar, has a much bigger role, and he even gets his own theme song.
Big Papa! Get to your thing! Big Papa! Ooh!
He's played over the top by Julius Harris, and normally I would say that's a bad thing, but in this case, it totally makes sense because it shows how the power is going to his head. Perhaps the biggest improvement is that there's way more action. Tommy still has his army and even added some old maids to it. They look so enthused. Plus, towards the end, the movie essentially becomes a combination of Rambo and Trouble Man. He's sniping dudes from the top of billboards, suffocating guys on planes, shooting guns through paper bags. What was the point of the bag? All these people can clearly see what you're doing. Then there's my favorite, this beach umbrella stabbing on this Confederate flag towel guy. The buildup is comically long. But that's not the best part. Check out the blood. I wonder whose decision it was to animate it. Would it have been cheaper to just use the bright red paint that all these movies usually use? It just seems so out of place. If you felt bored out of your mind while watching Black Caesar, then Hell Up in Harlem is the movie for you. I dare say you can skip Black Caesar, honestly, because the characters who do make a return didn't really have much of an impact in that movie. Hell Up in Harlem is definitely the definitive story of the Godfather of Harlem. Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of Black exploitation films. Usually in Black exploitation films, pimps are made to look like they live glamorous and amazing lives. They got all the ladies, they have all the money, they drive the best cars, buy the best clothes. Every now and then, they even have Miss America type pageants to crown the best pimp of the year. It seems like the life. What more can you ask for? There's very few movies that attempt to portray the pimp life in a realistic or negative light. And when a movie comes along that does it, it's unexpected. Willie Dynamite is one such movie. On the surface, when you look at it, it's just like any other Black exploitation pimp movie. Willie Dynamite, who's portrayed by Roscoe Orman in his very first movie, wears super bright flashy suits with equally flashy matching hats. He drives a massive purple car, he has a huge stable of women, and he talks with the laid-back and smooth cadence of his pimp contemporaries.
This is a business, baby. A production line. And just like GM, Ford, Chrysler, Willie's coming through.
However, underneath the surface, Willie Dynamite is a far deeper and serious story than it first appears. The life lessons kind of hit you out of nowhere, but the end result is a much more satisfying pimp movie than we usually get. For instance, yeah, Willie drives a fancy car, but there's a running joke in the movie where it keeps getting towed for various comical reasons, and he has to keep paying to get it out. It's hard not to laugh every time Willie exits a building and his car is being towed for like the third time. Or like when it seems like on a daily, one of his girls gets picked up and goes to jail. He looks so inconvenienced every time he has to go down to the courthouse and spend thousands to get them out. It's just one thing after another. Speaking of the courtroom, the movie has a really funny scene where a bunch of pimps congregate at the back of the courtroom to see if they can steal any sexy prostitutes from other pimps and keep them out of jail. It's like a silent auction that I can't believe the judge even allows.
Your Honor, I plead. That depends.
Just a moment.
All of y'all can kiss my big black.
Get that woman out of here before
They try to even get one of Willie's girls, but nah, Willie takes care of his. He knows he's the man and the best pimp in town. Just look at the confidence in his pimp hop. Nah, give it up, white man, you ain't got that kind of soul. Willie, of course, isn't the only pimp in town. And I have to mention this little pimp meeting that takes place. These dudes take their job seriously. The head pimp, Bell, holds a meeting to discuss splitting up the areas evenly amongst everybody. The vote is almost unanimous.
How's it sit with you, Cyrus?
I'm with you, Bill.
Top. Milky Way. Sugar.
Sweet.
Baylor.
Hey, isn't that King George? I hope he's a better pimp this time around.
Yeah.
But Willie, well, Willie really ain't with it.
Really?
And Bell tries to sell it to him in his own, flamboyant way.
Well, I respect your ambition, Willie, but you got to have vision.
Let me lay it on you, Willie.
Whoa there, buddy. We should have seen way more of Bell in this movie. All of the pimps, quite honestly. Willie Dynamite is primarily about a former prostitute turned social worker named Cora, played by Diana Sands, and her attempts to save the girls that Willie pimps from a life of prostituting and give them a better reality. I love the dynamic between Cora and Willie because she knows every game that he plays to keep the women in check, seeing that she used to be one of those women. Although he's usually one step ahead of her, it's like a game of constant chess between the two. Thomas Razulala makes yet another appearance and shows up to help her out in her crusade. Diana Sands did such a great job in this movie, and it's a shame that she passed away shortly after this movie was made. Willie Dynamite aims to show that pimping truly ain't easy, and all of the constant headaches that Willie goes through begins to take its toll and makes him question if any of it is all truly worth it. It peels off all the glamour and reveals just how much work it is to maintain the business model. It's also a story about reformation and forgiveness. The movie is way better than it has any right to be, and it's a shame that at first glance, the pimp imagery overshadows just how great a story it is. I wholeheartedly recommend Willie Dynamite and consider it one of the top 5 best films of the era. Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of Black exploitation films. Okay, now it's really time to kick some ass, karate style. Following the success of Enter the Dragon, in which Jim Kelly was a supporting actor, director Robert Clouse decided to give Jim his first lead role in the movie he dubbed the spiritual successor to Enter the Dragon. That movie is Black Belt Jones. The movie isn't quite as iconic as Enter the Dragon, because how could it be? But it's still a serviceable kung fu movie out of the hood. It even has a little humor. The best way to describe it is that it's a kung fu comedy. Yeah, that's the perfect description. When a mob boss wants to take over a city block, the only thing standing in his way is a dojo that's ran by Pop Bird, played by Scatman Crothers. That's right, the man who voiced Hung Kung Fooey runs a dojo in Black Belt Jones. I wonder if that was intentional. They sent a local gang leader to intimidate Pop, but of course he won't sell it, so they put a little pressure on him.
Where the hell did he hire this muscle from? Wish? He need to get a refund on dude. You can't be killing motherfuckers with one punch. What's wrong with you? That's all the story Jim Kelly needs to apply foot to mouth. This type of movie doesn't really even need more than that. You know what you came to see. They don't even bother to give him a real name in the movie. Everybody just calls him Black Belt Jones. I wonder if he's related to Cleopatra. Probably first cousins or something. The highlight, of course, is Black Belt beating dudes up. There's not a ton of variety in the fighting, unfortunately, but this is what passed for karate in the 70s, so you can't really judge it too harshly. The movie does a lot to sell it, with crazy sound effects and Jim Kelly's famous yell. The highlight for me is this scene when he tells the son of Pop Bird to turn off the light every 7 seconds while he's fighting.
What in the hell? It's Jones, spread out. My jaw's broken.
It's clever and kind of funny to watch. Gloria Hendry makes a return, and finally, she's in a movie where she's not treated like absolute garbage like she was in Black Caesar and Hell Up in Harlem. Here, she actually almost steals the show. Scratch that, she does steal the show. She's Pop Bird's daughter, and the person he actually left the dojo to. I like how they slowly build up the mystery of what kind of person she is, and just when you don't expect it, they spring it on you.
You crazy bitch.
She beats these dudes ass and was sassy about it too. I found myself enjoying her a lot more than Jim Kelly. If you're going to watch Black Belt Jones, then make sure you really enjoy karate, because towards the end, you're going to get a lot of it. Like the last 30 minutes is essentially Black Belt kicking dudes one by one while they foolishly run up on him in a single file line. Why they tried to interject a little romance, I have no idea. It's the most awkward love scene I think I've ever witnessed. And look at how they terrorize everybody too. All these innocent people just enjoying themselves at the beach. Black Belt Jones ain't no masterpiece, and it's not better than Enter the Dragon, but I would say it didn't have to be. It's the epitome of it was what it was, and if you want to see a cinematic karate action movie, then you won't be disappointed. Many critics at the time criticized the movie and said that Jim Kelly was trying to be too much like Bruce Lee, and I can see that, but I think he was different enough to carve a lane for himself and get out of the shadow of being the Black Bruce Lee. The movie got a sequel in 1976, but as far as Black Belt Jones, it was a good way to give Jim Kelly's career a kickstart.
Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of Black exploitation films.
Foxy Brown. Oh yeah, everybody's heard of Foxy Brown. Even if the first person who comes to mind might be the rapper from New York, the name Foxy Brown is one of the most well-known names when it comes to female black exploitation heroes. It's not like it's a ton of them. I already talked about Cleopatra Jones and Coffee, and up until that point, those movies basically led the way for female heroes. It's because of the lack of female-led movies that those two movies even existed. Following Coffee, the studio who made that movie wanted to do a sequel with the same characters called Burn Coffee Burn. However, director Jack Hill, who wrote and directed Coffee, had a falling out with the studio, and they didn't reconcile with him until the last minute. By that point, the studio no longer wanted to do a sequel to Coffee, and wanted something a little different. Gee, I wonder why that is. It wouldn't be because another movie came along and changed the game up, would it? It's easy to say that that's not the reason, but almost everything about Pam Grier and Foxy Brown is different than Coffee and more similar to Cleopatra. The clothes are more stylish and was designed by an outside designer, you know, like Cleopatra Jones. There's a female villain this time around named Miss Catherine, and while she's not as campy as Mommy was, they're very similar. Foxy even drives a nice muscle car. It's hard to ignore the similarities, but that's not to say that Foxy Brown isn't special on her own. Since Foxy Brown was supposed to be a sequel to Coffee, a lot of it is very similar. This time around, it's not quite sure what her profession is. They never really show her at work or anything. The truth is that she was supposed to be a nurse again like in Coffee, but it didn't have time to rewrite in another job. Instead, it seems like she's taken care of by her special agent boyfriend, who recently had a facelift to make criminals think he's dead. They showed her before and after, and I don't even think plastic surgery is that good now, let alone the 70s. But don't think about it too hard. He's not here for long anyway. He's gunned down in front of Foxy Brown, and that's all the motivation she needs for revenge. Antonio Fargas returns as Foxy's brother, who can never seem to do right. She loves him, so she keeps bailing him out, and it's hard not to feel sorry for him when you hear his explanation for his many hustles.
When I watch TV, and I see all them people in all them fine homes they live in, and all them nice cars they drive, and I get all full of ambition. And you tell me what I'm supposed to do with all this ambition I got.
The movie had an opportunity to do something really different here, but instead, it falls back on Foxy using sex to infiltrate and take advantage of dumb men. Nothing really wrong with that, but it's something we had already seen before in the previous movie. In this movie though, the men are particularly dumb. Come on man, just run a little to the left or the right. Jesus Christ. Just like in Coffee, Foxy joins a prostitution ring to get in good with the criminals. She's taken hostage again to some backwater place where she has to use makeshift tools to get out. You know, like in Coffee. She even comes across Sid Haig again, and although he's a friendlier character this time, he's still taken advantage of because of his inability to resist Foxy Brown's charms. If I wanted to watch Coffee again, I would have just watched that movie. Maybe it's just me, but after Cleopatra Jones, I guess I wanted a combination of the two movies. They kind of tease you during the credits with the 007-like intro, but that's about where the excitement stops. I do like how menacing Catherine Loder is as Lady Catherine. She's a highlight of the movie because she never really smiles and just looks like somebody you don't want to cross. There's also a side story about one of the escorts losing her son that's actually kinda sentimental, even if it does feel like it belongs in a different movie. At the end of the day, Foxy Brown is style over substance. The music is done by Willie Hutch and it's great. And there's no denying that its iconic style has influenced the looks and attitudes of countless women. After all, it's a movie about women's empowerment, and if taken as its own movie, there's a lot to like about it. You can say it's the movie that made Pam Grier famous and her most well-known, but it's debatable whether it's her best.
Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of Black exploitation films. By mid-1974, interest in blaxploitation movies started to go into a little bit of a decline. I would say the middle of 1975 was the height of the genre, and the popularity and box office numbers started to wane after that point. Part of the reason for this decline in interest had a lot to do with the fatigue associated with seeing the same negative stereotypes of black people constantly being pushed out for box office profit. It's this lack of variety of black characterization that partially led actor and director Sidney Poitier to direct 1974's Uptown Saturday Night. His aim with the movie was to portray everyday middle-class people with everyday middle-class problems. However, he wanted them to have some pride in themselves and their culture. Uptown Saturday Night is a comedy movie. Not just any comedy though, it's a buddy comedy. Something rarely if ever seen in blaxploitation movies. The movie stars Poitier himself as Steve Jackson, a blue-collar worker with a wife who's just trying to make ends meet. I like how they make a point to show his home life to give the character a little stability. His best friend Wardell, played by Bill Cosby, is the complete opposite of Steve. He's impulsive and never thinks things through, which often lands him in trouble. He means well, but most times he just can't help himself.
Say, brother. See, I'm talking to you, man.
What you want?
I'm asking the questions, sissy. Sit.
Cosby is primarily the comedy relief, but they both do a good job of standing out from one another and staying within the boundaries set for their individual character. At no point do they outshine each other. Usually when I think of Sidney Poitier, I think of a serious drama actor, but here he holds his own in the comedy department. He always has this deer in the headlights look that he maintains throughout the entire movie. He knows he's in over his head, and it shows without him having to tell you. It's a good thing that he does hold his own, because he has competition beyond Bill Cosby. Richard Pryor has a small role as a shifty private investigator, and I'm happy to report that unlike in The Mac, he's actually hilarious this time. Harry Belafonte is here as a crime lord named Geechee Dan, and honestly, he wouldn't have had to say a word in this movie, and I would have still died laughing at all the prosthetics they used to make him look like the Godfather. Plus, listen to his voice.
First off, I don't want you. I want your boss.
He goes all in on this role. Even my girl Katie Lester makes another appearance, although brief, as the girlfriend of Wardell. You can never have enough Katie Lester. There's far more funny characters in this movie, too many to list, but one of my favorite scenes is when this politician, played by Roscoe Lee Brown, doesn't know who's coming to see him, so he keeps asking his secretary to fill him in so he could change his style accordingly.
There are two gentlemen waiting outside to see you.
Yes, of course, from the mayor's office.
No, sir.
Ah, then perhaps the press.
Well, I think not, sir. They look, well, rather ordinary.
Oh. Constituents?
Yes, sir.
Show them in.
Gotta love a politician. The story goes like this. Steve and Wardell go to a literally underground gambling spot called Madame Zenobia's. They just want to unwind and have a good time, and maybe make some extra bread. But damn their luck, the place gets robbed, and everybody loses their money and jewelry. At first, it's no big deal. That is, until later, when Steve reads the paper and realizes that he's won $50,000 in the lottery. And wouldn't you know it, the ticket was in his wallet, which was stolen at Madame Zenobia's. My big takeaway from this is the fact that he memorized his lottery number. I can barely remember my social security number, and that's somewhat important. It's just one blunder after another as Steve and Wardell attempt to discover who it is that robbed the casino and get the wallet back. The movie gets progressively funnier every time they get a new clue and end up somewhere where they are totally out of place and in over their heads. It never really gets boring or stops being funny, except towards the end, when for whatever reason, Portier decided that we needed to hear an entire sermon that lasts close to 15 minutes. We can't even hear what the characters are saying, and it kind of makes no sense. Maybe he thought we needed a little Jesus after watching so many violent blaxploitation movies. The movie had two sequels, Let's Do It Again in 1975 and A Piece of the Action in 1977. They weren't really sequels, but more spiritual successors that kind of work as an anthology series since they have the same actors but playing different characters. Uptown Saturday Night is an enjoyable buddy comedy throughout that succeeded in telling a story about the common man and his struggles. If you want a good laugh, this is the movie to check for. Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black History Month, a 28-day celebration of black exploitation films. With blaxploitation, you get some of everything. No matter what you're in the mood for, they got something for you. Action with guns, you got it. Action with fists, say no more, fam. Action with comedy, they got that too. But what if you're in the mood for a little of everything? Well, 3 the Hard Way has you covered. It's an Avengers or Expendable style team up of 3 of our favorite blaxploitation action heroes. There's Jim Brown, former football player turned giant gun waving movie star who you don't want to mess with. There's Fred Williamson, blaxploitation veteran who uses brains and brawn in most his films. And then there's Jim Kelly, who doesn't need any of that because just like in Black Belt Jones, bad guys tend to line up nicely for him so he can kick them in the face. Team ups in the cinematic world was nothing new even in 1974. Universal Studios used to team up their monsters all the time, and putting stars who make similar movies into one big ensemble cast was an easy way to try to maximize your profits by combining audiences. By this point, blaxploitation had pretty much done everything, so why not start mixing it up? Don't even get me started on the plot of 3 the Hard Way. It honestly doesn't matter, but for the sake of thoroughness, I'll give it a rundown. A guy successfully escapes from a facility that appears to be experimenting on black people. The guy happens to be the brother of Jimmy Late, played by Jim Brown. The brother tries to tell Jimmy about the experiments and that the plan is to eradicate all black people, but Jimmy doesn't really even seem interested in the story. Usually around this part is when I say that's all Jimmy needs to start kicking some ass, but apparently Jimmy needs a little more motivation than that because he doesn't investigate or anything. He goes straight to his job as a music producer? Well, that came out of left field. At least the group he manages is the Impressions. That's Curtis Mayfield's old group. The only thing that does spring him into action is when the bad guys shoot his brother and kidnap his girl. But don't get it confused. He could give a damn about his brother. He wants the suckers that took his girl. Just listen to him.
About what time was
The
that?
hell with that. Where is she?
I don't know. I didn't see.
Well, what the hell did you see?
Okay, fine. Who shot her?
He didn't get around to telling me.
Yes, he did. You just didn't want to hear it. It's almost as if this was supposed to be the plot in the first place.
but they thought it would be too weak or something. The opening credits even kind of suggest it because it doesn't really fit in with the beginning of the movie.
Oh my God.
I need your help.
Always be here with me. I've never met anyone quite.
It is kind of hilarious looking at Jim Brown looking so awkward trying to be romantic. He's like, I'm too tough for all this. From here it's just one action set piece after another. Jimmy gets the band back together one more time to take down the man once and for all. He starts with Jagger Daniels, a businessman played by Fred Williamson. He gotta make sure he's ready first though.
Hold it, Jag, it's me late, man.
I'ma start greeting all my friends like that. What can go wrong? Mr. Keys, played by Jim Kelly, doesn't need no such audition. Aren't y'all the cops? Don't y'all have guns? Why y'all letting him beat y'all up like this? The movie is shorter than most black exploitation movies, so it moves at a breakneck speed. One minute they're interrogating a random guy they took from a warehouse, then the next they split up and take down whole city organizations single-handedly.
You already talked to Keys in Washington, and he's moving.
So am I, brother. So am I.
Well, Jagger will get to it eventually. The rest of the movie is balls to the walls action, culminating in a showdown against Nazis? Like I said, it's crazy, but honestly, I loved everything about it. Yeah, the acting is stilted and pretty terrible, but that's not what you care about in a movie like this. You just want to see things blow up, even if they don't have a reason to. Come on, you gotta love that. 3 the Hard Way is my kind of mindless action. Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of black exploitation films. I don't think the title of a movie has ever deceived me more than Black Samson, but maybe that's what I get for judging a book by its cover. With a name like Black Samson, I assumed it would be a tale about a black superhero with unlimited strength, maybe powered by his afro or something. Instead, I got a movie about a normal dashiki wearing community activist? Doesn't quite live up to the title, does it? Black Samson stars Rockney Tarkington as the titular character, and his presence is actually pretty intimidating. He's a massive man height-wise and has a booming voice that rivals William Marshall's of Blackula fame. That's about where the intimidation stops though. He carries around a quarterstaff everywhere he goes, and he needs it, because despite his name, Black Samson is constantly getting his ass whipped. In fairness, in most cases he's getting jumped by multiple men, and he does win in the end. No matter how many dudes they send at him, his hands are rated E for everybody. Samson's only motivation is, as usual, keeping the drugs out of the community. Only he doesn't do this by beating up drug dealers and maybe throwing them down a flight of stairs for good measure. No, he actually goes and just talks to them. Yeah, he may raise his voice here or there, but it's mostly just him explaining why they can't operate in his neighborhood. It's quite the departure from the usual neighborhood heroes who try to drive out the criminal element with guns. Plus, Samson doesn't need a gun. You know why? Because he has a goddamn lion. You get out of line, he'll probably just feed you to it. The criminal element in this movie is ran by an Italian mob-like group led by this guy named Johnny Napa. Dude is ruthless and terrifying in every scene, and it's nice to see a villain who isn't a complete buffoon. At first it seemed like this was kind of a gentrification story. It seemed like the mob guys was flooding the neighborhood with drugs to bring the property value down, so that they could move in and buy up all the buildings. But no, they just want to control the drugs in the neighborhood, and Black Samson is standing in their way. No idea how I confused the plot like that, but if I'm being honest, that would have made for a better story. Especially with the way that Samson attempts to pull the residents together to fight for their town and have pride in it. It fits better than the mob just wanting more customers. They do try to do some comparisons to the traditional Samson, because when all else fails, they send in a white woman to try to weaken Samson by getting close to him. but they pretty much dropped this by the next scene, so they could have just kept this to themselves. Even though Samson is a positive leader in the community, he operates out of a nightclub named Samson's, which is a bar and strip club? Talk about a contradiction, or is it? When you really think about it, what better way to bring people together than beer taps and titties? Carol Speed from the Mac makes another appearance as Samson's girlfriend, and she acts circles around everybody else in this movie if you ask me. She gets a lot more screen time and opportunity to show some range, and I think she delivered. I think Black Samson was a missed opportunity. I know there wasn't really a market for superhuman type characters in 1974, and this was 4 years before the first Superman movie, but I think making him an incredibly strong protector of the community would have made this movie stand out way more than other movies just like it. Without the powers, he's just another in a long line of crime fighters, and although he doesn't fight in the traditional sense, the movie didn't do enough with his uniqueness to set him apart. It's a decent movie, but it could have been so much better. Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of Black exploitation films. Alright, now it's time to get to the man you probably all been waiting for. Aside from Foxy Brown and Shaft, Dolomite might be the most well-known name associated with blaxploitation films. Growing up, I heard so many older people talk about Dolomite that he became this larger-than-life mysterious figure that I just had to experience. The only problem with that is that Dolomite was so raunchy and vulgar that my mother wouldn't let me get anywhere near his stuff. So the legend just kept building for years and years, until one day I finally saw the movie. And you know what? I hated it. Mostly because I didn't get it, and I was too young to understand what it was. I was unable to put myself in the shoes of the people who saw it for the first time in 1975. And I think Dolomite is the type of movie that's better if you go in blind. The hype was just too much for me, and I judged it unfairly against other movies at the time. I didn't know any better then, but over time, and once I got to know more about how the movie was made, I grew a huge appreciation for it. Rudy Ray Moore stars as Dolomite, a loud-talking, always rhyming, profanity-laden pimp who gets a chance to get out of jail to clean up the streets. That's it. That's the plot. Anything else I tell you won't make any sense. So it's best if you experience it for yourself. Moore said he got the idea of Dolomite from an old homeless wino who used to hang around the music store he worked at. He changed it up a little bit and took it on the road for his comedy shows. From there, it blew up, and Moore was able to make enough money by selling comedy records out of his trunk to finance the Dolomite movie himself, with some small help. That story is part of what makes Dolomite special. This came out towards the tail end of the blaxploitation era, and in a way, it kind of brings it full circle. Sweet Sweetback was financed in a similar way, and just like Sweet Sweetback, Dolomite is a movie made by a guy who wanted to get all his power fantasies on screen, no matter who told him no or didn't like it. The two movies are similar in style, acting, and cinematography, and I feel that Dolomite embodies the spirit of the entire genre. It is the very definition of a passion project. If somebody was to ask me what Dolomite was about, it would be impossible for me to explain. Things just happen with no rhyme or reason in this movie. Like when Dolomite gets out of jail, his prostitutes make a point to change him out of his jail clothes and put on better clothes before he gets in his car, only to take them right back off as soon as he starts to drive so he could get busy with them. Hell, he might as well have just gotten in the car butt naked. Oh, and those same prostitutes, they know karate for reasons. It was taught to them by this madam named Queen Bee. We never learn her relationship to Dolomite, and that's part of this movie's charm. Nothing is ever explained or tied together. The scenes all seem out of place, there's no plot, the acting is bad, and the editing is even worse. But for some reason, it's still great. It's hard to explain why that is. Moore as Dolomite basically makes the movie. His way of speaking just keeps you entertained.
Man, move over and let me pass before they have to be pulling these hush puppies out your motherfucking ass.
He talks like that during the entire movie, even in calm scenes. At some points, he goes into his full comedy routine, and it can be argued this movie is just one big advertisement for his albums.
There's a big bad motherfucker coming your way. and he's somebody that you don't know. He just broke a loose from Ringling Brothers Show.
There was a Netflix biopic about the making of this movie, similar to how Sweet Sweetback had the biopic Badass. It came out in 2019 and was called Dolomite Is My Name. The movie brought Dolomite back into the limelight and opened the movie up to all new eyes, and unlike me, these new fans were primed for what they were about to see, and thus knew not to judge the movie as I did all those years ago. I've seen people say over the years that the Netflix movie had scenes that weren't in the real movie, but in reality, the biopic decided to include scenes from one of Dolomite's sequels for some reason. So that's where the confusion comes from. For instance, the bedroom scene where the ceiling falls in was from The Human Tornado, the sequel to the first Dolomite. Dolomite had a major influence on a whole generation of people, including rappers and comedians. And there's an argument that can be made that his rhyming style was a big influence on early hip-hop culture. I always see people talk about movies such as The Room when they talk about the best worst movies, but I never see anybody talk about Dolomite. The movie Dolomite might be the best So Bad It's Good movie of all time, and I'll argue that with anybody who says otherwise.
I'm waiting for Dolomite.
For who? Dolomite, motherfucker, you heard her.
Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of Black exploitation films. I know I'm not the only one who's often thought to myself, I wonder what teenage life was like for my parents. As we get older, we tend to develop a glamorized view of our childhood and typically leave off all the unsavory parts. But we all know everything wasn't perfect. I bet if you ask most older people though, they would probably say that the movie Cooley High is the best representation of teenage life back then. If you went to high school in the 60s, that is. Cooley High represents a bit of a turning point for blaxploitation movies, and black cinema as a whole. The stories in these movies at the time were rarely if ever told from the perspective of the kids. In fact, out of all the movies I've done so far, there's only been kids in 2 of them. These movies are about exaggerated portrayals of adult fantasies, and don't really leave enough room for harsh realities. That's where Cooley High steps in. Written by Eric Monte and directed by Michael Schultz, Cooley High was intended to be a coming-of-age story about having aspirations in life despite growing up in the projects. Writer Eric Monte said that whenever a story takes place in a project, it's always bleak and hopeless. He wanted to show that not everybody who grows up in a housing project lives a sad and depressing life, and that a lot of kids have big dreams of the future. Cooley High stars Glenn Turman as Leroy Preach Jackson and Lawrence Hilton Jacobs as Richard Cochise Morris. Although if you're like me, Lawrence Hilton Jacobs will forever be Joe Jackson. They attend Edwin G. Cooley High School, which was an actual high school at the time in Chicago. Preach and Cochise have big aspirations, with the Preach wanting to be a writer and Cochise getting a scholarship to play basketball. But they barely go to class and spend all day getting into trouble with their friends. That's what makes Cooley High so good. It's a realistic portrayal of normal teenage life in the hood, and not some made-for-TV wholesome view where everything is perfect. Preach and Cochise deal with all the same issues that all young people deal with, no matter the generation. They lie about stuff to try to impress their friends.
This reminds me of the time, Jack. I used to drive this Maserati for this rich whitey over on the Gold Coast.
They're always trying to get in some draws. They succumb to peer pressure constantly, and they're terrified of getting caught by authority figures. The movie starts out as just fun and games, until Preach and Cochise are pressured into getting into a stolen car by 2 gang members. Once inside, they do what teens would do in a situation like that, and most of the scene was ad-libbed with those same instructions. I think it's this authenticity that makes this movie so timeless and enduring. Speaking of authenticity, director Michael Schultz went out of his way to make this movie as realistic as possible by casting actual gang members as the 2 bad guys in the movie. That could have gone left real fast, but thankfully, sometimes people just want their story to get seen and will cooperate to make that happen. It worked out great because had I not known, I would have assumed those guys were really great actors. However, there was no acting needed in this case. That goes for most of the cast. Even though some had some stage experience, most of them were first-time actors and were hired because of their age and told to just be themselves for the most part. Be on the lookout for Robert Townsend in his first movie role. He even got to speak a line.
Somebody ought to kick your ass.
Garrett Morris, that most people know as Stan from Martin, is also in it as a no-nonsense teacher. To say that Cooley High is a major influence is an understatement. Directors such as Spike Lee and John Singleton point to it as inspirations for their careers, and some movies can easily be pointed out as being directly influenced by it, like Juice and Boys in the Hood. Remember that music video for the Fuji song Killing Me Softly? Well, that entire music video was ripped directly from a scene from Cooley High. The music group Boyz II Men named their first studio album Cooley High Harmony, and one of the biggest songs off that album was It's Hard to Say Goodbye, which is a song featured in Cooley High. Speaking of the music, since this is basically a period piece, most of it is Motown music from the 60s, and I think this is one of the only blaxploitation films that didn't have an original score, and instead used time period appropriate music. I could say a lot about Cooley High, but it's better if you just watch it. It's one of those movies that somehow takes you back to your younger years, even if you weren't alive in the time period that the movie takes place, and it can also take you through a wide range of emotions. Cooley High is not only one of the better blaxploitation films, but one of the better movies of the 70s. Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black History Month, a 28-day celebration of black exploitation films. Welcome to the town of Buchanan, or Bucktown to you. Bucktown, USA, as it's known in some places, was advertised as another ensemble cast team-up film, kind of like Three the Hard Way. The two biggest stars are Pam Grier and Fred Williamson, who I have to say, as far as former football player actors go, has to be at the top of the list of the most successful, with Jim Brown being a close second. The movie also stars Thalmus Razulala again, who along with people like Gloria Hendry are unsung MVPs of the blaxploitation era in my opinion. Pretty much everyone in this movie I've talked about at one point or another this month. Tony King is here, and he was not only the traitor Zach in Hell Up in Harlem, but he was also the worst member of Gordon's team in Gordon's War. Art Lund, the crooked cop who beat young Tommy half to death in Black Caesar, is also back as a crooked cop. Talk about being typecast. We even get a young Carl Weathers. I think it's safe to say that Bucktown has plenty of star power. Usually, having all these people in one movie is a way to hide the weak plot, but I'm glad to say that's not the case here. Bucktown is a strong movie from beginning to end, and actually delivers a few surprises. Duke Johnson, played by Fred Williamson, comes into town to bury his dead brother. He's dropped off at his brother's nightclub, only to find it closed and shut down. From here, he has to unravel the mystery of his brother's suspicious death and try to pick up the pieces the best he can. Turns out, the town is run by corrupt cops who collect protection money from all the businesses in town and in turn terrorize the black residents. Duke's brother refused to pay, and that's what led to his death. At this point, Bucktown seemingly turns into a basic small town us versus them story. When realizing he's outnumbered, Duke calls in his friends to help him fight back against the cops. You would think that it's building to a big climax with the corrupt cops and the chief of police, but by 45 minutes into the movie, all of the cops are dead. So what's left to do? I won't ruin what happens next, and if you want to watch this movie, I suggest you don't read about it beforehand, because not knowing what happens provides quite the twist, and I think it elevates the movie above what it appears to be on the surface. I will say that I like the idea of a town fighting back against a corrupt cop system that's designed to oppress them. There's some subtle commentary here with the fact that the blacks in town outnumber the white cops, but still allow themselves to be subjected to oppression. Even the mayor is black, so you know it's deeper than just power. All it takes is one man to come in and change the attitudes of the people to turn the tide. One thing I don't like about the movie is how Pam Grier is kind of relegated back to damsel in distress. She's the widow of Duke's brother, and is kind of distrustful of Duke because he never contacted his brother while he was still alive. So of course she falls for Duke in the most unrealistic way possible. Foxy Brown deserves better than this. At a point in time when black exploitation movies were struggling to come up with unique and creative stories, I think Bucktown was right on time. It's one of Fred Williamson's better movies, and it builds up in a way that makes the ending satisfying. When you get a chance, take a trip down to Bucktown, USA. Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of Black exploitation films. Now we're moving into controversial territory. Right off top, you see a name like Coonskin, and you're like, what the fuck? But oh boy, that's only scratching the surface. The next thing you'll probably notice will be the blackface or minstrel show-like drawings of the characters, and immediately be like, alright, I'm out. And how can I blame you? It feels like Coonskin is out to offend you right from the onset, and that's a hard line to walk when you feel like your movie has more to say. How do you get people to look past the rough exterior and examine the themes in your movie without being turned off by its in-your-face imagery? That's the challenge that writer, artist, and director Ralph Bakshi had to overcome to present Coonskin to the masses. Fun fact, one of the original names for the movie Coonskin was Harlem Nights, so it beat the eventual Harlem Nights to that name by 14 years. If you haven't noticed by now, Coonskin is animated. Well, it's a combination of animation and live action, similar to movies like Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Coonskin uses a technique that takes still images of real photographs taken on location and animates over them. It works really well, and at times you completely forget that the background isn't animated. Bakshi used a lot of black animators to draw Coonskin, since many of them weren't chosen for animation roles in Hollywood. So right from the start, Bakshi was trying to make a statement. If ever there was a poster child for a movie that's hard to explain, it's Coonskin. Pappy, played by Scatman Crothers, and Randy, played by Philip Michael Thomas of Miami Vice fame, attempt to escape from a prison. They have to wait on a ride, so in the meantime, Pappy tells Randy a story about 3 guys he knows that are just like Randy and his friends. Pappy's story is just a setup for the rest of the film, and it's told in animated form pretty much until the end. The story is about 3 friends who are forced to leave their hometown and go to the big city, where they attempt to take over almost immediately. Philip Michael Thomas still voices the main character, Brother Rabbit, and his friend, Brother Bear, is voiced by none other than singer Barry White.
Ain't this a bitch? I guess this is Harlem, man.
Their third friend is a crazy preacher named Brother Fox. He's insane. It has a really funny scene where he opens a brothel, but since he's a preacher and wants to keep the sex holy, he marries all his customers to his girls for one day. You know, so that it's not sex out of wedlock. It's genius. That kind of craziness personifies Coonskin. At first it seems like the movie is incredibly offensive to black people, but Coonskin satirizes all sides. It has exaggerated characters of Jews, gays, whites, and especially Italians. Bakshi said that when he saw The Godfather, he was kind of appalled at how the Italians were made out to be these tough heroes who people should root for. In reality, these guys were super violent, and The Godfather gets his kids killed because of their activities. So what does Coonskin do? It makes the Italian Godfather character a fat slob, of course, and all of his sons, with the exception of one, exaggerated flamboyantly gay men. It's this satire and subversion of expectations that caused Coonskin to be re-examined over the years, almost as much as it was crucified upon release. Black organizations hated it, aside from the NAACP, who surprisingly was kind of mixed about it, describing it as difficult satire but supporting the message. That's the thing. Coonskin takes real life stereotypes and throws it back in your face for you to examine it deeper. What you see in this movie is no different than all the problematic stuff you've seen in every other blaxploitation movie of the 70s. The characters are drawn in a way to offend you on purpose, to spark conversation about it. I think the best scene that describes Coonskin best is the Miss America scenes. She's a giant, big-breasted white woman who's the personification of America, who seduces a black character in the movie with great promises, only to screw him in the end every time.
Okay, yeah, boy. Hey, put down your gun. You won. You can take me. Come on, fella.
Do I think Coonskin is a great movie? Nah, not really. But I do think it's an important piece of black exploitation history, if for no other reason than to examine its worst themes and worst aspects. Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of Black exploitation films. I have a theory. I think at first, writer and director Graydon Clark wanted to make the movie Black Shampoo a porn movie. But then the studio said, hell nah. So Clark decided, screw them, I'm gonna make a porn anyway. I mean, that's the only way I know how to describe the softcore porn nature of the movie. It's one part blaxploitation and another part sexploitation. And yes, that is a thing. As if blaxploitation films didn't have enough nudity, Black Shampoo doubles down. And if you think I'm using a lot of hyperbole to describe this movie, just check out the opening scene.
Bigger and better.
Yeah, exactly. Black Shampoo stars John Daniels as the character simply named Mr. Jonathan. Would it have killed them to give him a different name from his actual name? Looking at him, you would think that he would be the typical alpha male badass these movies are known for, but he completely bucks the trend. Instead of being a private investigator or a neighborhood crime fighter, he's a hairdresser. But don't go making any assumptions about John because of his profession. He's the best hairdresser there is, and it's only for one reason. I'll let you guess why that is.
Yes. Oh, this is so good.
That's right. He sleeps with the clients. Good thing he's actually good at his craft, for when the less desirable ladies come in, can't fix every problem with penis. Supposedly, this movie was based off another movie with a womanizing hairdresser simply titled Shampoo, but the two movies are nothing alike, so the only thing used was the concept. Black Shampoo does have a plot, but it's a bit convoluted, and most of it is used as a setup for sex or nudity. Tanya Boyd, who's famous for being on the TV show Days of Our Lives, works as a secretary in Mr. Johnson's salon. Out of nowhere, and seemingly for no reason, a mob-type crime boss that she used to work for wants her back. I guess she ran away and went into hiding, but I don't remember her explaining it. She didn't hide very far because his goons find her easily. It's here where Black Shampoo decides it wants to try to be a comedy instead of porn. And it doesn't quite work. Like this scene where the goons try to one-up each other while destroying Mr. John's shop. Just straight up silliness. Speaking of the comedy, and I guess keeping with the male hairdresser theme, Black Shampoo makes the decision to use homosexual men for comedic effect, with mixed results. Most of it would be seen as highly offensive by today's eyes, but I could kinda see people getting a chuckle out of some of it back in the 70s. It's clear the director really wasn't a fan of gays, because they get abused.
Black Babu, what's cooking?
Just this, sweetie.
My big issue with the movie is the fact that nearly every conflict in it either leads to sex or is an excuse to get naked. Shop gets destroyed? We'll worry about that later, girl. Show me how the sisters do it. Got to go into hiding because a crime boss wants you dead? Girl, I don't even think he could find us here. How about you show me some jungle love? Even the escape scenes are erotic. Like I said, this is pornography. Why else would you insert moans into that scene? Another issue is that Mr. Jonathan is boring as hell the entire movie, and they wait until the last 15 minutes to give him a chainsaw and some personality. It's obvious it was never intended to be an action movie, and they were told at the last minute that they had to include something. As a hairdresser, there's zero reason for this chainsaw scene to even exist. Sexploitation is just a fancy word for softcore porn, and this movie would fit right in on some Skinamax or something. I included it only to show just how much the well had dried up for blaxploitation by 1976. It was truly the beginning of the end of an era. Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of Black exploitation films. With the Black exploitation era good and dead by 1988, it's been argued that Hollywood all but turned their backs on Black writers and directors for major movies. Once they no longer saw a profit, the party was over. But what about all the kids who grew up watching these movies and grew a fondness for the over-the-top action and unintentionally funny production? Well, one such kid was Keenen Ivory Wayans of the famous Wayans family. While working on the stand-up comedy show Eddie Murphy Raw, Murphy gave Keenen the idea of making a parody of all the black exploitation films of the 70s, but for a modern day. Wayans took the idea and decided to make I'm Gonna Get You Sucker, a spoof film that pokes fun at the ridiculousness of the entire era, but at the same time shows great love and appreciation for the actors and their ability to entertain countless fans for over a decade. I'm Gonna Get You Sucker is not the first spoof film, but it can be argued it's the first one that focused purely on black humor. For somebody like me, the movie is and always will be funny as hell, but I can see somebody else not really getting it. The movie stars Keenen Ivory Wayans himself as Jack Spade, a young guy returning from the military determined to make a difference in his neighborhood. He comes home to learn that his brother died, not from ODing, but from OGing, which is wearing too much gold, and he's out to learn who's supplying it and to take them down. I love the fact that they never even explain how exactly you die from something like that, but it sets the silly tone for the film right from the start. There's even a running joke associated with it.
I wonder how we went to the bathroom with all this stuff on.
How do you go to the bathroom with all this stuff on?
How did you go to the bathroom with all this shit on?
The character Jack Spade grew up idolizing the neighborhood heroes of his childhood. You know, guys who fight crime and get rid of all the drugs just like every plot from nearly every blaxploitation movie of the 70s. And he really likes one in particular named John Slade, played by Bernie Casey from Cleopatra Jones. Even though he looked up to him, the movie makes it obvious he's not quite as tough, so simply being a fan of tough guys doesn't actually make you one. I'm sure he's not alone, as he was supposed to represent plenty of guys who looked up to those tough guys of the 70s. Other blaxploitation stars also appear in the movie, like Isaac Hayes, Jim Brown, and Antonio Fargas, and it's clever how the movie makes them come across like they're just too old for this shit. It makes it feel like these guys really were badasses in the 70s, but now that it's 1988, they would rather just pass the torch and live normal lives. For instance, Hammer and Slammer, played by Isaac Hayes and Jim Brown, run a rib restaurant. They pretend to be happy doing it, but they lose their patience in a classic scene with future famous comedian and actor Chris Rock.
Let me get one.
Right on. One order.
One order ribs.
No. One rib.
One rib.
I sure am hungry.
One rib?
You got change for 100?
Look, we're gonna need an orthopedic surgeon to remove my foot from your ass.
Hammer. No, brother, don't do it.
There's way more familiar faces in the film. Too many to name. I'd be here all day. But just know, it's a who's who of famous black people that you will definitely recognize, including at least 3 Wayans family members. The humor is on point from beginning to end, even the subtle humor that you might miss the first time you watch it. I quote lines from this film all the time, and I even used the line from my Black Track video for House Party 2.
You a soldier boy?
Man, look at all those medals. You a soldier boy? My favorites are the ones that directly poke fun at the cheap and unrealistic nature of black exploitation movies. Like the scene where Jim Brown is chasing Kadeem Hardison through a parking garage with a stupidly oversized gun. Kadeem notices something that is never even thought of or brought up when watching these old movies. It stems from the fact that in movies like 3 the Hard Way, Jim Brown and Fred Williamson fired their guns way too many times and never reload or run out of bullets.
Now wait a minute, wait 1 minute. Now you got a 45 revolver that holds 6 bullets. Now I counted at least 20 shots and you never reloaded.
That's right.
Come on, don't you
Hold it.
He knows it's bullshit, but he doesn't even care, because who really does care about that when you watch these movies? It's this self-awareness that makes this movie a classic to me. I like how it also tries to give practical reactions to a lot of the silliness we just accept in those old movies. Like, why would cops line up to get their ass whooped by Jim Kelly when they have guns?
So, just you 57 punks against Kung Fu Joe? Master of karate, kung fu, jiu-jitsu, and all other shit you ain't never heard of.
Another great scene involves Jack Spade's mother. I've already touched on how much the mothers in these movies are treated like afterthoughts and are written as useless without their sons. Well, I'm Gonna Get You Sucker flips that and makes Jack's mother, played by Janet Dubois of Good Times fame, into a no-nonsense ass kicker. But that's not the funny part. Remember that scene I talked about from Coffee where it was obvious a stuntman was used in place of a woman?
Hold it right there. Ain't nobody laying a finger on my baby.
Ma!
It's just one of those scenes that if you get it, it just makes it funnier, because knowing that sometimes the budget makes it hard to hide stuntmen just amplifies the humor. It's even better that I'm Gonna Get You Sucker goes the extra mile and completely changes the color of the character. I can talk about I'm Gonna Get You Sucker all day long, because it's one of my favorite movies ever, so I'm just gonna have to stop myself. Just know that it's one of the best homages to the entire genre ever made, and the fact that they used so many of the stars of that era and that they were self-aware enough to poke fun at themselves being fish out of water in a new era of heroes just makes it all even better.
Well, what makes you think you can be a black hero?
I'm an ex-football player.
Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black's History Month, a 28-day celebration of black exploitation films. I know you're probably thinking, wait, The Wiz isn't a blaxploitation film. To which I would counter with, what exactly makes a film a blaxploitation film? If we use majority of the films I've talked about on Black's History Month as an example, then you could say that one of the criteria is a movie with a mostly black cast that's made for a black audience. Well, The Wiz has that, so that's a check. You could also say that it has to have a funky or original soundtrack. The Wiz has that also. The one thing that it's really missing is a low budget meant to maximize profits, but we'll come back to that later. In my personal opinion, The Wiz is definitely a blaxploitation film at heart. They took a beloved classic and not only flipped every character black, but changed all the music and inserted some themes only an inner city person would pick up on. If that's not the very definition of the genre, I don't know what is. The Wiz started out as a very successful stage play and Broadway show in 1974. The Broadway show won several awards and was highly regarded as excellent. So you know it wasn't long before somebody saw dollar signs and purchased the rights to make it a full-length film. That somebody was Motown, and they decided to make the Wiz movie with a $24 million budget. An astronomical sum for a black movie in the 70s, but they seemed confident that they could make it profitable. When I was researching the movie, it seems like they were trying their hardest to sabotage the movie at every turn. The biggest issue that people even still to this day have a problem with is the fact that instead of casting the Broadway star Stephanie Mills as Dorothy, since she had done it for so many years on the stage and was only 21, they made the decision to cast Diana Ross instead, who was 33 at the time and deemed too old for the part. The original director even quit because she was cast. Talk about being pissed. I was always told as a kid that it was because she was secretly dating Berry Gordy at the time, but in reality, he didn't want her to get the part either. So she went over his head and got the part another way. I mean, I get it. If you're a studio head and Diana Ross tells you she wants a part in your movie right after doing another fairly successful movie, you go with what you think is a sure bet. Can't really blame them. But if you ask me, Stephanie Mills would have definitely been the better choice. Just listen to both of their versions of the song Home and decide for yourself. I guess it's a good thing then that the rest of the cast in the movie itself is so excellent. Michael Jackson stars as the Scarecrow, and he was the perfect choice, just based purely off how he dances and stumbles around as a character just learning how to walk. He's excellent. Oh yeah, he can sing too. That's kind of important since this is a musical and everything. Considering the fact that originally they wanted J.J. Walker from Good Times to play the Scarecrow, I would say they made the right choice. The Tin Man is played by Nipsey Russell, and for anybody still on the fence about this being a blaxploitation movie, you can't tell me the Tin Man isn't a pimp. He even got ladies. Ted Ross completes the main group as the Cowardly Lion, and I can see him saying, "I'll do it, but only if I get to wear these platform shoes." Toto is here too, but it's obvious they didn't even train the dog. They just sent him running into the scene when necessary. Even Richard Pryor is here again as the great and powerful Oz. The Wiz is excellent to me. It's one of my favorite movies, so I'll admit I'm a little biased. The screenplay was written by famous director Joel Schumacher, and even though it was criticized at the time, I applaud him for writing it in a way that appeals to black people instead of the same meanings behind the original. The music is top notch, the acting is decent, and I love how it takes everything you know and love about the Wizard of Oz and adds soul and seasoning to it. You like the Munchkins? Well, the Wiz has street kids instead. You like flying monkeys? Well, our monkeys don't fly, but they got a hell of a biker gang. What about the poison poppies from the Wizard of Oz? Yep, the Wiz has, well... Like I said, it's a blaxploitation film. Even I can admit, it's not a perfect movie. It runs a little long, probably because of the extended dance and music scenes, especially during the Emerald City sequence and the ending. It can also be a little scary for young children, but I don't think that was intentional. I honestly didn't even notice the nightmare fuel until I got older. Unfortunately, critics hated The Wiz, but I feel like most of them were comparing it to the original and were out not to like it from the start. Some criticized how cheap the set pieces looked. I can agree with that. Makes you kind of question the big budget. Where did all the money go? To Diana Ross's hair? Some criticized Diana Ross, which is also fair. Some movie theaters outright refused to play the movie out of loyalty to the original, and because of that, it was a financial failure. Personally, I've always felt like the original Wizard of Oz is overrated and never liked it, so I'm glad that a version was made that appealed to me. The movie has become a cult classic over the years and has come to be far more appreciated. The only sad thing about this movie being made is that the old idea that you can make an all-black movie and it would bring in a ton of money in mostly black neighborhoods was dead. It can be said that The Wiz officially killed the blaxploitation era, and black cinema wouldn't recover until the 1990s. If this is considered the end, then I gotta say, at least it went out on a high note. Pimps, power, and pretty ladies. This is Black History Month, a 28-day celebration of black exploitation films. After I'm Gonna Get You Sucker, the blaxploitation era just kind of faded away. It wasn't completely forgotten about, but it kind of went to the background of people's minds. Yeah, there were a few movies that were released that paid tribute to it, like Original Gangsters and Jackie Brown, but those movies proved to be celebrations of the actors that were a big part of the era more than the actual movies themselves. Then you had movies like Undercover Brother, which was admittedly very funny, but was more of a modern film that showcased the style of the 70s more than anything else. Then when it seemed like nobody was paying attention, a trailer was released online for a film called Black Dynamite, and fans of the 70s black exploitation era got excited all over again. It showed Michael Jai White as the main character, also named Black Dynamite, a big, tough, crime-fighting machine with a giant afro and even bigger guns. He looked like everything we knew and loved about the era, all crammed into one person, but we wouldn't learn just how much it showed love to these movies until it was released. Black Dynamite was written and directed by Scott Sanders, and also co-written by Byron Menz, somebody who you definitely know, but probably never knew his name. He played Ray Ray on South Central, so I know a bunch of you right now are going, oh yeah, that guy. The story goes that Michael Jai White was listening to James Brown's Superbad one night and started feeling nostalgic for the 70s. He contacted Sanders, and they started coming up with the idea of the ultimate homage to the black exploitation era. I have to say, they nailed it. Since they decided to make it another spoof, like I'm Gonna Get You Sucker, they had free reign to go as silly as possible. Unlike I'm Gonna Get You Sucker though, they wanted the comedy in Black Dynamite to be grounded in the silly inconsistencies that already existed in these old movies to begin with. Things like boom mics being visible in the camera.
To the wall. I ain't gonna let them hurt the kids.
Stock footage being used even if it doesn't match what's on screen. Characters being swapped out because of unseen offset differences.
motherfucker.
And many, many more examples. They crammed so many time period accurate stuff into this movie that you just have to take a minute to admire it all. As for the characters, well, they made sure to fit every type of those into the movie they possibly could also. Black Dynamite himself is a conglomeration of a bunch of different people. He's no nonsense like Trouble Man, a former CIA agent like Cleopatra Jones, an all-around badass like Jim Brown and Fred Williamson, and a karate master like Jim Kelly. He even uses Jim Kelly's trademark scream. They tried to cram every favorite black exploitation character you can think of into Black Dynamite, and I love it. I also have to give Michael Jai White props for being able to effortlessly convey every single one with ease. Dude is underrated. Black Dynamite isn't the only one who's a throwback to the past. His best friend Bullhorn, played by writer Byron Menz himself, is clearly influenced by Dolomite. He rhymes the entire movie in that loud voice, even in calm scenes, just like Dolomite.
Oh, you's a corn-fed fool with a lot of muscle mass. But it's time for Bullhorn to get up in that ass.
Sally Fine Richardson is in it too, as a generic love interest, even though they give her way more personality than most of the women from the 70s ever had. I like how they included the awkward tough guy romance scenes also. Of course, I can't talk about Black Dynamite and black exploitation as a whole without mentioning the pimps and the Big Pimp meeting. It's almost ripped directly from the movie Willie Dynamite and has a bunch of famous faces in it, like Miguel A. Nunez, Bokeem Woodbine, Arsenio Hall, and even singer Brian McKnight plays the background. They even take a vote just like in Willie Dynamite.
How's it sit with you, Cyrus?
I'm with you, Bill.
Oh, bitches.
I can dig it, baby.
Top.
Crenshaw Pete.
Milky Way.
Captain Kangaroo Pimp.
Willie?
Willie?
You probably noticed I haven't mentioned a plot. Yeah, it has one, but let me ask you this. How many of these movies have I talked about this month that has had a coherent and easy to follow plot? You could probably count them on one hand, and Black Dynamite knows this. So it does the same thing, and by the time you reach the end of the movie, Black Dynamite is on remote islands with deadly kung fu fighters. Then next thing you know, he's at the White House. It's all over the place, and silly on purpose, and that's the whole point of it all. Black Dynamite is the ultimate homage, parody, love letter, whatever terminology you want to use, to the 70s black exploitation era of movies. There's so much more and so many funny moments I could talk about, but it's better if you just watch it for yourself. It's obvious, a lot of love and care went into making this movie, and it was done by people who genuinely loved everything about blaxploitation. It was filmed with an old camera and high saturation to give it that same look and feel of the 70s. It has an original soundtrack, written and mostly performed by Adrian Young. And most of all, even though these old movies from the 70s didn't win many awards, I think Black Dynamite is the best celebration of their achievements and impact that anybody could ask for. And it looks like everybody involved loved doing it and had a lot of fun. And I also had fun, going back in time and reviewing all these old movies. I hope you all enjoyed Black's History Month. I watched around 50 movies in preparation for this, and chose the 28 that I thought not only made the most impact, but also seemed most interesting to talk about. I know some movies that people were looking for didn't appear on the list, but I'm considering doing this again next year if people enjoyed it. Let me know what you think. There was far more that I could have talked about this month, but I tried to keep most of the videos under 5 minutes, so I touched on the most important parts. The term blaxploitation was coined to be a negative term by the NAACP, but I'm glad the connotation was turned around into something embraced by tons of people. It can be argued that this era of movies saved the movie industry in the 70s, and that alone should prove that they deserve their place in cinema history. I'll be back soon with more videos after a short break, so make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and join me here for the next Black Track video. Until next time, I'll holla at you.